All right, well, so I haven't been here in a number of years, probably 3 or 4. Does that sound about right? And so, you know, I've been growing orchids for 42 years now. How can that be? Right? Yeah, that's what I mean. And so I started growing orchids when I was 18 years old. And, you know, it was the neighbor lady's fault. She recruited me to repot her orchids because she grew big standard Cattleyas, and so I'd go over there and I'd pick them up and divide them all for, and then it was pretty fun, I guess, until I got paid, because she paid me with Orchid Bulletin magazines. And I'm not sure any cash transferred hands, or if there was, it was such a small amount it made I have no recollection of it. But I do remember sitting, you know, and looking through these magazines, and I saw an ad for an orchid show in San Diego. And so I drove down there in my light blue Ford Pinto station wagon. You had one of those? Yeah. And so got down to the show, and I bought, and I was overwhelmed, right? It was Cattleyas and Cymbidiums. That's what was happening in San Diego at the time. And so I bought Cattleyas. I love Cattleyas. And I remember coming home, and I had 2 armloads, 2 boxes, just packed full of Cattleyas and flower. I get in the house, and you know, I'm still living at home. I'm 18. Mom, look at this. I love orchids, right? I love these things. I'm going to love orchids. And she looks at me and she says, "How much did you spend on those?" And so I was taken aback. This is very supportive and helps you out and things. And so I, being an honest child, not used to, you know, misrepresenting myself in front of my mother, I told her that I spent $300, which I did. And she said, $300? That was your life savings. And so I was a bit taken back by that. And so then I started to say stuff, no, but I'm going to love orchids. I'm going to grow orchids for the rest of my life. I'm 18 years old, and I know exactly what I'm going to be doing. And I believe her wisdom at that point took over and said, "We'll see." And so, of course, now I'm committed. My mother threw down the challenge, right? She threw it down, okay? And so I'm hanging tough. I built a greenhouse, a nice place, put all my orchids out there. The neighbor lady gave me a few divisions. I had a few plants. And so first month goes by and still have a couple orchids in flower. Next month goes by, nothing in bloom. Another month goes by, a lot of green. About the 4th month, I'm sitting with my dad, and this story goes something like, you know, "Hey, Dad, think I'm losing interest. Think Mom was right." And he looked at me and he said, "Do not tell her that." Let me introduce you, which he did. And this gentleman, John Walters, had a small orchid nursery, and he needed a young guy with lots of energy to do stuff, to work around the nursery. So next thing you know, I'm working at the nursery, and he had a lab. He loved to make crosses. And so I made hybrids and started sowing seed. I had to because I was broke, right? I spent my life savings. And so I started making hybrids at a very young age, and that's all thanks to John. He's 93 years old now, John. It's amazing to think all that time has passed. But I started with Cattleyas, and they were my first love, but I must confess, I have strayed. A lot of people have Cattleyas, and Cattleyas are magnificent. They're widely variable. There's all kinds of colors and shape. You can have a Cattleya collection with plants in bloom every day of the year. And you can't say that about a lot of other orchids. And so they're important to me. But I wanted to distinguish my collection. I wanted to have plants that were truly unique and one of a kind. And that's when I discovered Catasetums. And this talk is about Catasetums and how to grow them. And so,
Fred, is your mother still alive?
My mother is still alive, and she is 89 years old.
And she loves your working in the orchid business.
Yes, she is now, you know, and it's interesting because I've called her out on this. I haven't waited 40 years to do that, you know, but about 20 years ago, remember, Mom, when you told me, and she, no. She says, no, I never did that. And so, you know, oh well. All right, so Catasetums and how to grow them. All right, Catasetums. Can you all you guys see from? I'm going to stand over here a little bit. Yeah. All right. So Catasetums is simply pronounced. A lot of orchids are not simply pronounced, but Catasetums are Catasetum. Nothing to it. The word Catasetum comes from the Greek. Cata means downward, and seta means bristle. You know, and so I've been growing orchids, like I said, for quite a while, and so you learn to deal with nomenclature changes in orchids, and so you think about taxonomy when these things happen, and so this blows me away. So here is one of the most magnificent, fantastic groups of orchids, and they name it the downward hair or downward bristle orchid. I don't know. Just doesn't make sense to me. They're members of the Cymbidianae tribe. So Catasetums are related to Cymbidiums. Catasetums are from the New World. South America, Central America, Latin America. And Cymbidiums are from the Old World. Indochina, Northern Australia, places like that. And so it's fascinating to think, how can they be related? Now, I just returned from a trip to Australia, and I can reassure you that it's a 15-hour flight over water. And so how that orchid seed could travel that distance is fascinating to me. And so so I was doing some research a while ago, and so, you know, how old are orchids? Right? You ever asked that question? The earliest types of orchids seen on this planet are about 100 million years old. And so you remember your supercontinent, Pangaea, from your studies of geology? About 250 million years ago is when Australia and South Africa and South America started to break apart. So how far apart could they be in 100 million years? Maybe that's when the seed got spread around between continents, because there's a plant in Africa, in South Africa, called Ancelia gigantea, that's also a Cymbidianae. So there's Cymbidianae in South America, South Africa, and in the Old World. So it's fascinating. So there must be something going on here that we don't fully understand. And Catasetumi have been in cultivation since the 1800s. Those first sailors that came over to the New World saw Catasetums growing because they lived in these estuaries, these freshwater estuaries where the ships would harbor, protective harbor. And they make excellent hobby plants. And so Catasetums are widely distributed throughout the Americas. The environmental conditions they prefer are like this: open areas with lots of light, good air movement. They live where they're monsoonal summers. It's hot and humid in the summer, and they have dry winters. This is how they've evolved. Catasetums, they grow in areas often that look like this. If you're looking around for Catasetums and you see that, you're generally on the right path. And when you take a close look at these palm trees, you see Catasetums growing on them. And Catasetums, you know, what's life like on a palm tree? Can be good if you're a Catasetum. Palm trees aren't very bushy, but they have leaves that are directly overhead. So the plant is protected from midday light, but they get lots of low-angle light in the morning, protected midday, lots of light in the afternoon, lots of air movement around a palm tree. And notice where the plants are growing? At the joint where the leaf joins the trunk. Now, if you've ever had the pleasure of shucking a palm tree, you'll discover a few things right away. The way the palm leaf is shaped, the arching branches up into the sky, and their leaf is pleated, and so dust and debris falls on the leaves. When it rains, water ducks that material down the leaf, down the stem to where it joins with the trunk. And then the excess water then continues down to the root system of the tree. So in that joint, a bunch of organic material collects, and it's quite dirty actually. It's a very fine organic material. And this is right where the Catasetums want to grow. So what does this tell you? There's a lot of nutrients there. And any small amount of water that falls on the leaves moves the water to that point, so there's plenty of moisture as well. So lots of light, lots of air movement, lots of moisture when in active growth, and nutrients. And so below these big mother plants, you find baby plants sprouting. It's so cute to go in nature and see just swarms of baby plants. And you can see some where the seed has germinated in ideal conditions are much larger than where seed has fallen in less than ideal conditions due to the access to nutrients and moisture. And so, oh yeah. All right, so when you're collecting orchids in the wild, right, you have these moments. And this is my Crocodile Dundee moment. Right? Do I look Australian? Yeah. Yeah, and it looks like I'm smiling, right? But that's not a smile. That's a grimace. Notice the unnatural orientation of my hand here. I'm not clasping my orchid find. That's because my finger is dripping blood due to the cactus that I encountered with my hand shortly before. Yeah, so this is in Venezuela. All right, and so back to orchids. All right, so this is the ideal place. And look how many plants. Each Catasetum will take advantage of each node. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And there's one right account over here. 6 plants on the side of the tree you can see. And if you look over here, there's more. There's one on this tree, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe even 8 there. So these trees are just festooned with Catasetums. It's the ideal conditions to grow. And so Catasetums, when they receive what they need, they can grow beautifully. But what about this? Okay, what are telephone poles treated with? Creosote. Is creosote a potting media I would find in your growing area? Absolutely not, right? And so here is a Catasetum doing quite well in full sun, full wind, full everything on a creosote-soaked telephone pole in Venezuela. And you can see how well it's bloomed. You know, there's a telephone guy or electrician, right, who looks up at that every day, probably, and not happy because that's a weed up there, a plant out of place. Well, if that's amazing, what about this? Okay. When you got Catasetums growing out your house, right, that is a good sign that they're pretty dang tough. Look, it's growing out this little crack. Now, if I was this Catasetum, I would be extremely nervous due to the wiring job from the electrician. I believe that is a 220 circuit, and I see no ground wire. That's a hot one right there. So don't take a shower and touch the outlet in this house. Yeah. And so, but this just goes to show you with very little of anything, Catasetums can survive. All right, so Catasetums, they're widely variable. There's over 135 different species of Catasetums, and they have amazing shape, color, and form. The male flowers have pollen ejecting triggers. This is so cool. Other orchids do not have pollen ejecting triggers, and we're going to go over this some more later. They also have male and female flowers. All right, this is weird, you guys. All right, so you can look at everything on this plant table except the one plant on the end, and every one of those has perfect flowers. They have both male and female parts present in the bloom, and you can self-pollinate those flowers. Catasetums do not. They have either male or female flowers. This is very cool. They're the easiest to grow of the genus, and they can flower 1 to 5 times a year. And they make excellent hobby plants. All right, here's Catasetum pileatum. Pileatum is the showiest and the largest of all the Cattleya species. This particular flower is nearing 4 inches in natural spread. And you can see this plant with 2 inflorescences here, maybe 14 to 15 flowers on it. This is a variety called Snow White. Here's Carlos. He's my protege, young Carlos. So the flowers even with his nose and down to his belly button. Carlos is not a dwarf. The inflorescence is just about that long. Just fantastic. And there's, of course, 2 spikes here. Marvelous albino form. Pileatum, this is another variety. So this is to help keep me honest. My model's arm. This flower is nearly 5 inches from here to here. This cultivar is called dinner plate because the lip is so huge and flat.
Are we looking at the male or female?
These are male, yeah. Here is a variety Imperiale. Here's Carlos once again, and you can see, so if you know from your eyes to the middle of your chest, that is the Imperiale form and a closed up. This is quite a rare cultivar. You rarely see these red forms. And what's really amazing here too, there's some AOS judges here, right? Yeah, and students and things. So here's an inflorescence and here's an inflorescence. But look at the arrangement. And then coming back across, look at that. It has a perfect arrangement across 2 inflorescences. So how many extra points do you give for that? That's a 10, you guys. That is a 10. I've seen that before on any orchid where 2 independent inflorescences side by side align and create perfect arrangement. Unbelievable. Yes?
So the 2 bristles, is the right one always curved back into the flower and the left one always pointing straight down? Is that always the case?
No.
Okay.
Just in the case of Pileatum, Expansum, and a few others where this one cuts across and one comes out. We'll talk more about that later. All right, so here's Expansum, also curling across and coming down. Expansum is named for its large expanded lip. It's spotted flower, and the lip is almost square-like. Expansum comes in lots of different colors. This is a cultivar named Midori. I got this from a Japanese gentleman, and he gave it to me, and he said, "This is Expansum Midori." And he gave it to me with quite a bit of purpose. And so I received the plant, and I was quite proud to get it because I knew the color of the flower, this amazing avocado green color. I took it into judging, got an award on it from the American Orchid Society, left the cultivar named Midori. It just sounds so cool, right? Midori, that Japanese liqueur Midori. Oh, what a great name. And so later I find out Midori is green in Japanese. And so this is Catasetum expansum green. And so for all this time, I thought it was such a marvelous thing, and it's just quite a simple name after all. But fantastic color. Then there's Tenebrosum. Tenebrosum from the Latin means dark or shadowy, and this was called for many years the black orchid. And of course it is quite dark, but Tenebrosum is the petals and sepals are always framed by a chartreuse colored lip. Then there's Spitzii. So Spitzii hasn't really been in cultivation much in North America. Of course, it's been in the wild for many years. Look at the diameter of the stem. There's a regular Argentine ant. So that's about as big around as your thumb, and there are 47 flowers on that stem. This is the red color form. Then there's a yellow color form, and even an apricot color form of Spitzii. Beautiful. Now I want to, well, then look at this one here, Venaceum, the wine-colored Catasetum. So we've seen Pileatum, Expansum, Tenebrosum, different color forms, Spitzii, Venaceum, and every flower looks different. There's a wide variety of flower forms, and so I want you to keep in the back of your mind the variety that we're seeing of these male flowers. Then there's a whole different group, the Saccate or Saccatum family, and these have pockets in the middle of the lips or sacs that are quite deep. And the inflorescences can be very long on these. This inflorescence here is a little over 3 feet long, and there's about 56 or 57 flowers on that stem. And see the long, lazy spiral, right, coming down here? beautifully arranged on these big, long inflorescences. Catasetum. Then there's one called osculatum. And so I was giving a talk, I was in Florida, and a young man in the back of the room raised his hand and said, I know why that's called osculatum. I didn't know why. So I called on him, and he shared with us that when he was a young man, he studied in the seminary, and he learned what osculate is. Anyone know what to osculate is? Very good. That's what you do when the Pope comes in the room, holds out his hand, you kiss the ring. So imagine this, a bunch of early taxonomists, this was before electricity and things like that, sitting around a dark room, candle lit of course, or maybe a whale lamp burning a light, drinking wine because water's dangerous. And so dark room, candle lit, drinking wine, and you look at this orchid and you call it the kissing Catasetum. You notice the lips, right? So these guys are pretty creative. Osculatum. All right, it's the downward hair kissing orchid. Then there's denticulatum. There's a group of taxonomists in Brazil. Have you ever had Francisco Miranda here speak? I bet you have. Right. So Francisco Miranda was the leader of this gang of 4. And when he was a grad student in Brazil, him and his taxonomist colleagues realized that they were cutting roads through Amazonia to get to the trees. Now, normally, traversing through Amazonia is a rather rigorous activity that is only for the most daring individuals. But now they're roads, and so they take their cars and they drive through Amazonia and they discover 4 new Catasetums. And this was described by Francisco Miranda, denticulatum. It's a miniature Catasetum. Mature plant is only about 6 inches tall. Flowers are a couple inches across. There can be 25 or so on a stem. And he named it denticulatum because of the toothed edge of the lip, the dentate or toothed Catasetum. Another gentleman on the trip, Mr. Kleber, named this after himself, and this is Kleberianum. And Kleberianum is quite spectacular with this big, flat, bright yellow lip, tiger stripe, dorsal petals and sepals. It's also a miniature plant, but it produces a rather long inflorescence, nearly 2 feet long, and it can have 15 to 25 flowers. There's only one problem. Remember those roads that they cut into Amazonia to travel down to find these orchids? Well, guess what? Those roads gave access to the trees in Amazonia so they could cut down the trees and haul them out. Kleberianum is believed to be extinct in the wild today and is extremely rare. There's only 4 or 5 plants that I'm aware of in the world. I have a couple of them. I killed one, and so I'm responsible for 1/3 loss of all Kleberianums in the United States. I have 2 left. There's a guy in Brazil, Antonio Schmidt from Bella Vista Orchids. He has a few, and if you email him and beg, he might bring you one. And then there's Tigrinum. So I was on a speaking tour with Francisco Miranda, actually. We had several stops together, and so on the first night we were speaking, I always wondered about this. This is an orchid from the New World. It's called Tigrinum. All right. Where are tigers from? India, right? All right. Are tigers spotted or are tigers striped? They got stripes. So tigers are from Asia and they're striped. Here's an orchid from the New World that is spotted. So Francisco Miranda, he's not he might have been born at night, but wasn't last night. So he quickly grabbed the hold of what I was talking about and stood up and he said, Fred, let me clarify a few things. We are excellent taxonomists, terrible zoologists. And he then went on to explain in Spanish and Portuguese, when the Spaniards and Portuguese came to this world and they saw cat-like animals, they called them tigers because they didn't know better and the name stuck. So every kind of cat was called a tigre. Tigrinum. True story. Might have been better to call it lepardinum.
How big are those flowers?
They're about 1.5 inches across. The inflorescences are quite long. They can be 30 to 40 flowers on a really good plant. They'll produce 2 to 3 at a time and flower several times a year. And the neat thing about tigrinum is the petal shape. And what's really cool is the bottom lobe of the petal is so broad it closes the gap between the lateral sepals in the petal, which makes a very full flower, which is highly desirable in the eyes of AOS judges. No, I've just realized its value. This comment was just realized in the last few years. So if you look at my new Catasetum list on the website, there are 6 new tigrinum hybrids. And if I was a betting man, I'd put my money on those. They're going to have magnificent shaped flowers, and they're going to really set a new standard in Catasetums. It may be more important than denticulatum was in breeding process. All right, and so then the last of the 4 is Ceroides. And to give you a sense of how small these are, you saw the plants on the table. Here's the side view of the pot. Here's the plant in flower. There's 35 or 36 blooms on that little inflorescence. And this is the alba form, and that's the normal color form of Ceroides. Super cool stuff. All right, but then there's a whole nother group, a whole different looking kind, Fimbriatum, the fimbriate or frilly-lipped. This is a normal color form. Then there is a Morenianum form, a purple color form. How about Barbatum, the bearded Catasetum? Fantastic. You just want to touch that and feel it. It's really stiff. It's not like a beard, but it's really bristly. Think about the variety, right, that we've seen. And how about this one, Gladiturum? I've had people shout out, it looks like a shrimp. Yeah? Yeah. How about Callosum? Beautiful, elegant looking flower. And there's a different color form of Callosum that looks like this. See the trigger hairs? They're straight here.
One of the pollinators.
We're going to go over that. Yeah. And then there's Lucius. So any of you who are in tune with the international intrigue of Venezuela know that El Jefe, President Maduro, or dictator, or whatever he is, was recently had an assassination attempt, so he claims. And he's blaming the Colombians, of course, because Venezuela and Colombia has never gotten along. There's a piece of land between Venezuela and Colombia referred to as no man's land. That is where Lucius grows. And a few years ago, there was autonomous went in there and they found this. Here's a close-up of the flower, but here's the plant and Carlos. So at the feet of Carlos, right? Now Carlos is not 6 feet tall, he's about 5'8", but that is close to 5 feet from here to here. It is really an impressive and very unusual Catasetum species. Phenomenal. The neat thing about it is the flower life of this is 3 to 4 weeks, which is unusual for Catasetums. And the plant actually looks like a Cerdipodium. It's so big and so tall, and that may have been why it wasn't spotted early, because the plant looks so much like a Cerdipodium, and that long spike sticking up may have fooled the early taxonomists. But this plant also is breeding excellent offspring, just beautiful hybrids. All right, then how about this? Okay, there's another true story. I'm actually going to Toronto, Canada later I was in Toronto, Canada giving this talk for the first time. And I'm standing, and it's a large group, it's about 150 people. I'm up on the stage looking down, and people are like, start talking amongst themselves. And then there's a little bit of laughing. And someone said, monkey face. And so I'm standing in front of the stage, and people are laughing, and they're saying monkey face. And then people started pointing my direction. And I'm really getting self-conscious. You know, you do not expect to be called monkey face and people pointing at you when you're giving a talk on orchids. And apparently I was wearing my feelings on my sleeve because someone in the front said, no, 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 not you, the picture, which made it way worse. That's just, it's beet red. Terrible embarrassment. I can tell you right now, from this angle, you cannot see that. Can everyone in this room see the monkey face? No question. An alien monkey face, yeah. So the eyes, right, and then there's the nostrils, the mouth, and the chin. I know, I get it now, but I took this picture. I put this talk together. This is not the monkey face orchid, but it does have an unusual resemblance. Catasetum sanguineum. Pretty cool. Monkey face. All right, and so then how about this one? Roseoverans. Remember Peleodum? How far have we gone away from the look of Peleodum? Very alien looking. And how about this one? Globiflorum. Now how scary is that? Is that alien looking? Look at the mouth. It is horrific. The tonsils. The helmet. It doesn't need eyes. It's an alien. It's probably not Globiflorum. It's probably Globiflorum. But I like saying Globiflorum. So fascinating group. Now we've only seen 34, I think it's 34 species. I could go on 100 more times, but I'll stop now. And let's look at female flowers. So sexual dimorphism, my favorite subject. Right? Sexual dimorphism? How can you not love that? That is where you have male and female flower forms. The male flowers are large and showy, and they have pollen ejecting triggers. And the female flowers, which we have not seen a single picture of, are helmet-shaped. You can only identify Catasetum species by looking at the male flowers, because the female flowers look all alike. And you saw how variable the male flowers were, but the female flowers are the exact opposite. Both male and female flowers produce a fragrance. And so, Peleodum, magnificent, large, showy flowers. They're highly fragrant. They can be seen from long distances. Female. Helmet-shaped. Here is Lucius. Magnificent, long stem of flowers. Females, green helmet. Tenebrosum, dark, shadowy, mysterious, beautifully colored. Females, green helmet. We could do this 126 more times. But we won't. All right, so pollination of Catasetums. Now this is weird, right? Yes, ma'am.
So how do you get male and female flowers? Same plant, different plants?
Same plant produces male and female flowers. That's an excellent question. And ask it again at the end of the talk, because after we talk about culture, that's really applicable then. But that's really a thoughtful question. Why would a plant be male and female? Right? Because it has to evolve to be that way. It just didn't appear that way. They're cymbidiums. They're related to cymbidiums. Cymbidiums are perfect flowers, and cellias are perfect flowers. Grammatophyllums relate to cymbidiums, perfect flowers. So why would a Catasetum be imperfect? What's the purpose of that? Why would Mother Nature evolve a plant to be imperfect? One reason: to ensure genetic diversity. If you're male and female, you can't pollinate yourself. And so these are the most highly evolved plants to have male and female flower forms, to avoid self-pollination. It's fantastic. And so Catasetums are pollinated by male euglossine bees. Male euglossine bees are stingless bees that are quite common in the tropics. The male bee collects the floral fragrances off the surface of the flowers, puts it in pockets on their legs, and when they get the right mixture of fragrances, that is supposed to be very attractive to the female euglossine bee. This is fantastic. The male bees are going out collecting smells to make them smell good to the females so they can reproduce. And the better you smell, the better you do. All Catasetums have the same fragrance, male and female. And this is the euglossine bee. They're very attractive bees, and they're highly studied by entomologists. There are books and lots of people studying euglossine bees. Here's one. You can see the pocket on the hind leg. Here's another one.
Fred, you have killer bees wiping out the nests of
The euglossine bees are solitary bees. They don't form a hive. Yeah, there is no nest. Yeah. And so here's a euglossine bee on a flower. Here's a great shot of the pocket. And look on the back, the thorax. There is the, attached to the back, the stipe and the pollinia wafers from visiting a male flower. And then look at this. Here's a female flower where the euglossine bee lands on the lip, crawls up inside the confined space of the helmet. The helmet prevents you from moving around and orients you in just the right position. And so when you back out, the pollinia slips into the stigmatic cavity and pollinates the flower. Fascinating. All right, so let's look at this. Sum it up. Male flower. It's showy. It's highly visible from long distance. Oils, this waxy kind of quality on the surface of the flower. These are those fragrant oils. You can actually wipe it and smell it on your finger. You can see the pollen ejecting trigger. So if you're a Catasetumi and you need to get pollinated, would you want the pollinator to go to the female flower first and then the male? Doesn't work that way, does it? You need to go to the male flower first, so the male flower is more visible, it's more fragrant, it's easier to see, it's easier to spot. And so the male euglossine bee says, hey man, that's where I want to go so I can get my fragrance oils. Lands on the flower, and it's easy to pick up everything you need. But if the male euglossine bee could get all it needed and fly away without receiving the pollinia, does that help? Nope. So the male Catasetum evolves a trigger, a hair trigger. The euglossine bee is picking up the oils, it touches a trigger, and it shoots the pollen out. Whap! On the back of the bee, it hits it with so much force that it knocks the euglossine bee off the flower. And there's a scientific term for when you get whack by pollinia. It's called negative reinforcement. We've been negative, right guys? Have you ever been negatively reinforced? You don't forget it soon. And so the euglossine bee now remembers that look of flower and has been negatively reinforced and doesn't want to go back there. He's a self-respecting euglossine bee. Gets up and flies off. And then picks up the scent from this flower. Takes a look at this flower and says, hey, that is non-threatening. Right? What a difference. Smells the same. You still have your purpose to get those essential oils so you can go get female euglossine bees on your side. You land on the lip, you crawl up inside, in those essential oils on the female flower are way up in the inside of the helmet. And there's just a little drop or two. And so it only takes a few seconds to complete your activity. And so then on the way out, the pollinia slips down, slips into the stigmatic cavity, and breaks off as you fly off. Now, male euglossine bees, right, are not known for their memory skills. maybe some men too, right? And so they have to forget about what happened and return to the male flower, get the essential oils, hit the trigger, get the pollinia again, remember that this was a bad experience, and then fly back to another and repeat this process in order to assure continued pollination of the female flower.
Do there are many natural hybrids?
Very few. Because Euglossean bees come in many different sizes and shapes, and most Euglossean bees have evolved to pollinate just one Catasetumi. Yeah, and Catasetums generally in nature too don't overlap their flowering. And so this species blooms now, the next species, the next species. But there are a few known ingrades of Catasetumi. So, yeah, and so this is fascinating, right? You should all grow Catasetums for this reason and this reason alone. To wow your friends of your knowledge of plant sex. Right? Think of the fun over cocktails. And just imagine if you had a male Catasetum in flower, and all your friends who don't know anything about orchids, you can invite them over. You could have them touch that hair. Don't call it a trigger, call it a hair. They stick their finger in and touch that, and whack, the pollen jumps out, scares the crap out of you. And you're going like this, and you're screaming and yelling, you throw your drink everywhere. Of course, it settles down after a few moments, and then the punchline, you've now been pollinated, right? And how many friends have you pollinated? Not a lot, I presume. And so this is why these plants are so interesting. Yeah, train them to pollinate the flowers. Yeah, yeah. There's little nectar. See, like right here, there's this little nectary thing, and so the ants are getting the juice off of there. Now, after that pollinia is inserted into that stigmatic cavity, in less than 5 minutes, the stigmatic cavity closes shut and tight as a frog's you-know-what in a pond. There's nothing getting in there. To further prevent pollinization from a second suitor, to assure genetic purity in that, right? It's fascinating. All right, so hybridization. So Catasetums come in many different colors and shapes and bloom periods. This is great because there's a near infinite opportunity for making hybrids. Breeding can be hard because you have to have male and female flowers if you're going to make a cross. And we'll talk about how we get those later. And if I forgot to mention, all right, and so Catasetum expansum crossed with Pileatum makes orchid glade, a really early hybrid, still important today in breeding. You take orchid glade and cross it back to expansum, makes Susan Fuchs. Beautiful hybrid. You take orchid glade and cross it with tenebrosum, and that makes Donna Wise. Marvelous looking thing. Lots of awards have been given to Donna Wise. Then we have Mark Dimmitt, orchid glade crossed with Donna Wise, and the Mark Dimmits have been fantastic. Mark Dimmitt lives in Tucson, Arizona. You think it's hot here. Oh, it's brutally hot over there. Look at the shape of the lip. It has a heart-shaped lip. There's this big contrasting white spot, broad segments, the rich burgundy color. And you might expect this from this pairing. But about 20% of the cross look like this. Pure albino. Remember Pileatum, the green Pileatum? That's showing through in this cross. All right, and then some hybrids with Denticulatum, that newly discovered one. We crossed it with Susan Fuchs and made Karen Armstrong. Really cute hybrid. Mini Catasetums, miniature in stature. Then there's Chuck Taylor, Denticulatum in Portuguese star. So Chuck Taylor, so I'm in Edmonton, Canada, you guys. It's minus 40 degrees there, a lot. And I was visiting him, and he bought a plant in the spring. I was speaking up there, put the plant outside, and of course they have like 22 hours of daylight there. Grew the plant, flowered the plant, exhibited the plant, and got an AOS award, an AMAOS, on this. And so he called me up. told me he got an award. What do you do when a guy shows you up? You name the cross after him. So that's Chuck Taylor. No complaining about orchid growing around here, you guys. All right, and then there's okay, here's another one of these. Now, who would name this Dentigrianum? Isn't it tigrinum? Don't ask me. Denticulatum by tigrinum makes Dentigrianum. And so, how attractive is that? Here, let me go back. Remember we were talking about the petals? And so look what happens in the first hybrid. It closes the gap. Magnificent. And does not that flower have a quality to it that is particularly attractive? Is it the color, or is it the shape, or is it both? It's really nice. Yeah. Look at the lip. I mean, I don't know. You just want to kiss it or something. And so Dentigrianum, marvelous hybrid. All right, and then how about Milana Davidson, Denticulatum in Penang? It makes Milana. Again, so all these that are named after people are all because they bloomed the plant before I did and asked if they could name it, or if I had to embarrassingly say, well, since you bloomed the first one, what do you want to name it? So Milana, here's an interesting looking one. Really attractive. Here's Belle Taramonto, Chuck Taylor, and Bella Vista Sangria. How beautiful is that? Look at this long, lazy spiral. You see it coming down, and here it crosses over and comes back. Wow.
Is that the only color form that showed up?
Nope. Most of them were more reddish or pink. This was the only one that had like that porcelain kind of color. And there's just a little blush of pink. See it here? That's fantastic. What a great thing. Why did I sell this plant? I don't know. But Bernie Butts owns it, and he's one happy guy. All right, and so this one. So Sheriff Frank Drew. So I sold Frilly Doris by Susan Fuchs to this guy in Virginia Beach. He's the old retired sheriff of Virginia Beach. He was the sheriff for about 15 years, never was contested. The guy's name is Frank Drew. How could you compete against a guy named Frank Drew? What a perfect name. And so he bloomed the first one, sent me a picture. All right, what do you want to call it? You showed me up. Let's call it Frank Drew. It just sounds so beautiful to say Frank Drew. Frank Drew. And he says, nope, I want to call it Sheriff Frank Drew. Fine, Sheriff Frank Drew. So he named it Sheriff Frank Drew. He got 5 or 6 AOS awards to plants that he's had. And so a couple years ago, I was in Virginia and down at the Atlanta Orchid Society, and I had some of these to sell, and all the members wanted a piece of the sheriff. All right, here's a close-up. And so then Louise Clarke, my mother's namesake. All right, so here she gets her due. Donna Wise by Susan Fuchs makes Louise Clarke. Magnificent hybrid that's done really well, and just amazing looking plant and flowers. And so thanks, Mom. All right, so how do you grow these guys? When in active growth, you want to water like a monsoon. Right now, these plants live in monsoonal conditions where it's raining almost every day. It's hot and humid and wet. That's how they've evolved, and so that's the best way to treat them. You want to apply a little bit of fertilizer every time you water. A half a teaspoon in a gallon of water is just about right for optimal growth. Remember, they're growing in the leaf where that dirt and nutrient is. You want to use a well-drained potting media because you're going to water a lot. You repot and divide just as new growth is beginning because the new roots follow with Catasetums. And you don't begin watering until the new growth has new roots that are 3 to 8 inches long. Now, normally I don't ask for forgiveness when I'm giving a talk, but I do not want to be insulting to anyone, but I will be repeating, don't begin to water until the new roots are 3 to 8 inches long, at least 7 more times. So please don't feel any offense to that. Just want to make my point. What's the first rule of marketing? right? Yeah, that's right. And so, the environmental conditions that Catasetum and I grow best in are like this, where the summer temperatures are 80 to 95. Sound familiar? Summer lows between 60 and 75. Now, winter lows for Catasetums, they really don't like to go much below 50. And so if you're growing them outside, that would be a no-no around here, but you may need to move them into the house during that period of time. They like light levels between 2,000 and 4,000 foot candles, and humidity between 40 and 80%. Does that sound like your summers? Pretty much, right? You should be able to grow magnificent Catasetums outside here all summer long. Now, the growth cycle in nature, it's hot, humid, and wet in the summer and cool and dry in the winter. Catasetums require these conditions because they've evolved under these conditions for millions of years. You can't change a plant's evolutionary characteristics in 1 year. Or how about your lifetime? It's not going to happen. So don't try it. It's better to do this. Watering begins when the roots are 3 to 8 inches long. Watering too early will cause bulb rot. This is why you don't want to water too early, because it discourages new growth and may rot the roots. Also, most of the roots die during dormancy from the prior year. And so you need the new roots to replace the prior year's roots. And so if you water too early, you may affect that. Now, just because a root is dead doesn't mean it still doesn't function, because the roots have several purposes. One is to pick up nutrients and water, and the other is to anchor the plant. So that even though the roots aren't functioning to pick up nutrients and water, they still hold the plant down. So here's a plant with a new growth sprouting out. But look at the pseudobulbs. I have not applied 1 drop of water to this plant in 2 or 3 months. What are pseudobulbs? Are they water storage vessels for your plant? Does that storage vessel appear depleted of its store? Nope. If you have a tank and the tank is full, can you put more in it? Nope. And so why would you feel compelled to water this plant? The tank is full. The plant is telling you, my tank is full, because you can look at it and see it. Now, what fools you is this new growth. And you go, oh, look, it's starting to grow. But the growth is 1 inch long. How much photosynthetic surface is on a growth that's 1 inch long? Negligible. There's more than enough water here. So this growth continues to grow, of course. About 3 or 4 weeks later, the new growth is elongated considerably. Now you see green root tips emerging from the base of the plant. It's been 3 months since you've watered. You want to water so bad. This is when you get ready to water. You buy a new hose. You move the plant closer to water. You mix up fertilizer. You do anything, but don't water, because the roots are not 3 to 8 inches long. So you wait a little bit more. Then the roots have drilled down into the potting media. Some might be jumping over the sides. Some might be popping out the drainage holes at the bottom. Now you can begin to water. And when you begin to water, you want to water heavily, because the monsoons have started. And when the monsoons come, they wash nutrients from the trees down to the root system. That's how roots get nutrients. The water carries nutrients to them. The plant then enters into a rapid growth stage and starts to grow very quickly. The growth elongates. You can watch it grow. If you're growing hybrids that bloom in the spring, spikes will start to appear. They'll flower. They look magnificent. You bring them into the meeting, and everyone ooh and ah, and you feel really good. You know, you got the limelight on you and all that stuff. And then something happens. Thanksgiving. The days are getting shorter, it's getting cooler, and your plants are responding, and they start to turn yellow. And the plant is speaking to you again. It's saying, hey, look, I'm losing my photosynthetic surface. I have no chlorophyll. If I don't have a lot of chlorophyll, what's the use of water? Because I can't photosynthesize. And so at this point, you begin to reduce watering because you want to simulate what happens in nature. Do the rains just end one day and never rain again, or do they taper off slowly? You want to taper off slowly the watering so the plant gets the message that winter is coming, and so it'll harden off to prepare itself for the winter rest. Then your plant should look like this. Hopefully you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 inflorescences from your prior year's blooming. All the leaves are gone and no more water.
I have a quick question.
Okay.
How old is that plant?
How old is that plant? Well, probably 1, 2, 3, maybe 8 or 9 years old.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
When you have multiple new growths, do you need to wait for them both to kind of reach those thresholds? Or do you start watering when one hits that 3 to 8 weeks?
I would wait till the smallest growth is big enough to start watering, because if you get water trapped in the center of that new growth, probably will cause problems for you. Yeah. So here's a plant in nature growing, okay? Now it's growing on the ground. Remember my Crocodile Dundee moment? So this is what I was collecting. And so these were growing on the ground, and the biggest plants were on the ground. There were some rocks, like with cracks in the rocks, and there were some plants growing there, but they were smaller, and there were some small trees where they were growing, and they were even smaller yet, all the same species. The plants growing on the ground with access to lots of nutrients were bigger. And so Catasetumi live generally in a semi-deciduous type of environment. So you see all the leaf litter on the ground here? Imagine what happens after, well, how old is this plant? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, at least. So if you've had 12 years of leaf litter falling on the floor or on the ground, it starts to compost up pretty good underneath there. And so this plant has dealt with at least 12 wet dry cycles. And do you see any excessive dehydration on this plant? All right, maybe a little bit down here, but it's not excessive. Look how plump these are. They can sit there, no problem, after they've hardened off properly and hold their water through dormancy. You pull the plant out of the ground, and I was surprised to see a new growth that was buried by all those leaves. Our guide told us that it's not going to rain for another month. The ground is bone dry. You can see how it's all cracked here. And you can see the white roots that have grown, and you can see the prior year's dead roots here. You flip it over and you realize that all the roots are growing out horizontally. They're not growing down like a taproot. They're growing out horizontally into the rich organic compost. And you can see the dead roots here. So imagine this. Here's a plant before the rainy season. It's growing out this big root system into this rich organic compost, waiting for the rains to come. As soon as the rains come, fall on the ground, they turn all that dry compost into solution. The roots pick up the nutrients, pick up the water, and grow like crazy. This is why you wait to water until the roots are 3 to 8 inches long, because that's exactly what they do in nature. This will make a huge difference in your ability to grow Catasetumi. So here's my greenhouse right about now. It's nice and luxurious, beautiful green plants. Here's the greenhouse in January. Now, just because they're dormant doesn't mean they don't. All right? There's flowers here, and there's flowers there, and 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 then come back down here, here. All these plants are in flower because they will bloom when they're deciduous. In fact, some of the Catasetumi only bloom while they're deciduous. So how cool is that? Just to have a dead stump of a plant, no leaves, covered in flowers. Winter humidity. So around here, you guys get pretty cold. You can get cold, right? But usually not for real long periods of time. A week or so. So when you have low humidities in winter, so if you're growing in the house and you're running a lot of heat and you got really low humidities, I would recommend you put the plants on a tray with pebbles of water to give a little humidity around the plants. Because in nature, it's not 15% humidity, right? Even in the middle of winter, it's still going to be 30, 40, 50%. And so by increasing the humidity around the plant will help maintain those bulbs plump and vigorous looking. So you want to wait to irrigate until the new roots are 3 to 8 inches long. If I have failed to mention that 7 times, let me say it one more time. Wait to irrigate until the roots are 3 to 8 inches long. This is the single most important thing in their successful revival from dormancy. And then, of course, it's enough water, light, and fertilizer when they're actively growing. You want to use a well-drained potting media because you're going to water a lot. You want to use a half a teaspoon of fertilizer in a gallon of water every time you water. You're going to reduce irrigations when the leaves start to yellow. You're going to stop watering when the bulbs are leafless. You're going to repot and divide just as you see new growth starting. And if I haven't said 7 times already, they make excellent hobby plants. And so special thanks to these folks. They provided some of the photos. Ed Wise, Greg Alicus, Jamie Lawson, and of course to all of you who grow and flower Catasetums. Now there was a question on the floor about why they're male and female. And so you saw how dry they can be in the winter months. And the plants experience significant lack of resources. They just sit there and wait for months. And so plants that have lots of resources during the growing season are going to be larger and more robust. So that means water, fertilizer, light, and time are going to be big, large plants. Big, large plants produce female flowers because you have to, as a female plant, you need to carry that seed pod through dormancy until the ideal time to disperse the seed again. And so if you were to have perish in that activity, you would not be fulfilling your destiny as a Catasetum plant. Male plants, on the other hand, only have to produce pollinia. And that doesn't take a lot of resources. So younger plants, plants that are grown in less than ideal conditions, are more frequently male. And it's just that simple. It's about resource management. Plants with access to lots of resources are better off at being female than plants that are not. Yes?
Is that like a gene trigger? Like they have all the stuff and then...
Each plant can be male or female, depending on the cultural conditions in which it's grown under. So if you're big, strong, and robust, yeah, you're going to be a woman. If you're petite, slender, and skinny, yeah, you're going to be a man. Yeah.
Will it change if you change the growing medium or whatever?
Yeah, you can. And so one year, if you grow your plant really well, you'll have females. The next year, shove it in the corner, don't fertilize it much, forget about watering, and then it'll bloom all male. The other thing to do is sometimes it's maddening. As a hybridizer, you got to have male and female. There's nothing worse than have a plant that blooms female, 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 female all these years. And it's just as bad as a plant that's male, 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 male all these years. You got to have both to the bird, you got to have both. And so often I will keep 2 plants. One I'll grow much brighter and larger, and that'll be my female plants, and then I'll have a 1 or 2 bulb division off to the side that will be hopefully then the males. Now sometimes I'm wrong and it doesn't quite work out that way, you just don't know. But there's some cool things you can do. If you have a plant, see if it's going to be female by the bud shape. And you can take like a test tube and take aluminum foil and make like aluminum foil cap, a long cap, and stick that over the developing inflorescence. And then as that develops, there's going to be quite a bit of stress, and the buds recognize that this is not a good condition to be female under. And it'll transition and convert to male flowers. It's super cool. And so you'll have females on the bottom, and then in the middle somewhere, you might have perfect flowers that are half female and half male. And you might have one that's 3/4 female and 1/4 male. Then you'll have 50-50, then you'll have 1/4 female and 3/4 male, and then you'll have male at the tip. It's really cool to do that. And so if you have a number of plants, it's really a fun experiment to do. Yeah. Yes?
What is the female euglossine bee doing?
The female euglossine bee is waiting. The female she's waiting for a very aromatic male euglossine bee to appear in her life. And then she picks that one that smells right to mate with.
Okay, but she has no role in the flower.
None whatsoever.
She does everything.
It's only the male euglossine bee who visits the flower. Yeah. The female's only job is to pick the male. It's a weird thing, right? Are men the most beautiful of the sex? Or it's the female? I know you get in trouble saying stuff like this, right, guys? And I didn't see a lot of guys jump to my defense because you're smarter than the average bear. And so, but in the case of Catasetumi, right, and you see it in insects and fish, and you see it in chicken, right, the rooster and the chickens, right? And so you see this a lot. Dimorphism is a very common thing, and it's often about the male wanting to look better to impress the female. The elk with the giant rack of antlers, right, to look more whatever attractive to the females. And so that's what the euglossine being is doing with these smells. He wants to smell the best for the females.
Does she look anything like the male? Or
Similar, a little bit smaller than the male. They look very similar. Yeah. In fact, that's an excellent question. I'm going to need to look into that. There's another question over here.
So I just want to ask about what the roots are doing during dormancy. So are you implying that they stay alive during dormancy and then die during the new growth?
So
What your picture is that when the females are teaming up with the roots?
yeah, so the roots of Catasetums during dormancy cease to be effective at picking up nutrient and moisture. Most of the roots. There's a few that survive, but generally they cease. But they still work as a root to anchor the plant down. And so it's the new roots that are going to grow and do the heavy lifting that the new growth requires to grow and bloom well. And so that's why you want to wait to start watering, and so you get a good strong root development, and so you'll have a big healthy root system. And you'll see this when you repot your Catasetum. So you'll take a plant that you've grown, and you've grown it beautifully, and you feel really good about it. You take all the media off, and you go, wow, all the roots are flat. The vellum isn't puffy and effective, and you see that right away when you repot. And so it's really important to take care of the new developing roots, because those are the most important roots. And in fact, on most orchids, the new roots that are growing are the most important roots, and the older roots are the least important roots. So if you ever have to make a decision when repotting, you want to protect the new roots and less protect the old roots, because the new roots are the most important. Yes, ma'am?
Do you recommend cutting off the old roots when you repot?
Yes. Yeah. There's no need to leave them on there. Yeah. One more time? Absolutely. You can store Pollinia for about 1 year, no sweat. Yeah, I do it all the time. You have to do it when you're breeding Catasetums, because otherwise, and so what you have to do as a hybridizer, you have to plan crosses out often a year or more in advance. Right? You collect pollen this year, but you make the cross next year. Yeah, do it all the time. Yes?
Is backbone propagation easy?
Yes, it is. Catasetums are remarkable plants, right? Normally, if you were to divide a Cattleya, someone would recommend a minimum of 3 bulbs, maybe even 4 bulbs. But on a nice, robust Catasetum plants, you can have 2 bulbs and do great. In fact, even if you made a mistake and 1 bulb broke off, it would probably still sprout and do fine for you. I typically try to leave 2 bulbs. In my breeding collection, I want at least 2 back bulbs in a growth, because I don't want to skip a year, no matter what, because you lose opportunity then to make a hybrid. But as a hobbyist, you know, 2, 3 bulbs, you'd be fine. And if something happened and and you got 1 bulb, it would sprout and it may not flower, but then again it might. It depends a little bit on your culture. I have tried several times and I have not been successful. Yeah, but there are a number of hybrids out there. There's another plant in this group called Cycnoches, and there's been a lot of Cycnoches crossed with Ancelias. Ancelias, yeah, from Africa, and have flowered, and they've been okay. They're pretty distant relatives, and so they don't really pair up great. There is one example in the American Orchid Society records where a Cymbidium and a Catasetum was crossed together, flowered, and was actually awarded. Yeah.
Do the triggers become more sensitive as they get older?
If you shook it, you could shoot it out. And usually, like, it can be pretty tough sometimes to get to judging. If you're driving down the road and someone cuts you off and you hit the brakes, and the next thing you know, you have pollen stuck to your back of your head, or later you're combing, you're like, what's that? Oh, it's Pollinia. Like I have a spot on my shirt here. And it's like, what the heck is a darn Pollinia somehow shot and fell in my pocket? Last week sometime. So
Flowers collapse after they eject the pollinia.
once the Pollinia is released, the male flower is done, and so it senesces right away. Yeah. Yeah, you don't want to shoot them off if you don't have to. Yeah. Yes.
On the Paleotum, I think that was the white flowered, you said it would be reclassified, or such a unique flower that I think you said it should be classifications, unique flower itself. Is that Paleotum?
No, the Paleotum happens to be mostly a light cream or green color flower. There are some other color forms, some that are pure albino, and others like that red one, that Imperiale form. Some people think that's a natural hybrid, but it's really complicated. So it was a natural hybrid, but then it got bred back to Paleotum, back to Paleotum, back to Paleotum, back to Paleotum. And so, but no one really knows. And so, did I answer that? Did I answer the question?
So what is the ideal look to win in a judging like that?
Oh, what should a flower look like to win in judging? There's a good question. So, all right. So I'm an American Orchid Society judge myself, so I can answer with some degree of experience. Yes. So American Orchid Society judges are highly trained individuals. And there's a number of things that are very important to them. One is that all the flowers are in perfect condition. So if there's a flower that's damaged in any way, that is not a great thing and will not mean you won't get an award. So you want to have a perfectly flowered inflorescence. You want the flowers to be well arranged. In the case of Catasetums, I showed you the picture of that red one, how the flowers had all stacked up beautifully. You want each flower to expose itself well. You don't want one flower hiding behind another. And so you can see each bloom. And then the judges are going to look at that flower and compare it against prior awards. And so they might measure how large it is and how wide the petals are and a number of things like that. And then they will finally make a decision on if to proceed with award or not to.
So it doesn't really have to be how many fluorescents, you say large, I heard you say that, but would you just one fluorescent on
Could be. It depends on the species and the prior award. So if you brought Peleotum to the judging table and it had 30 flowers on one single inflorescence and they were in perfect condition and beautifully arranged and they were well sized, I think the judges would say amen and award that thing. Now if you brought a Peleotum to the judging table and it had 5 inflorescences but they only had 2 flowers each on them and a couple of the flowers were crushed, probably wouldn't do well. So it just all, you know, I would say this though, if you're interested in getting awards, right, it's just like if you're interested in fishing. If you want to catch fish, you gotta go fishing. And if you want to get awards, you have to exhibit plants. And then that's the best way to learn about what the judges are looking for. Yeah. Another question?
I must be a little obtuse, but what are the downward hanging bristles?
Let's see if we can go back here. Can I back up? Back up. So the bristles are like these hairs. They're trigger hairs. And you can see here, let's see if you can see this. This isn't the best picture, is it?
It's in the flower, not on the bulb.
No.
Yeah, it's on the flower here. We'll get there in just a second. Oh, come on. What am I doing? What a dummy. Yeah, yeah. Here, we can show you. Let me do this real quick here. The best one to see it on is right here. From current slide. All right. Ugh. Okay. All right, right here. So this is the column of the flower, and this is the pollinia, and this is that trigger. And it was pointed out earlier, one of the triggers crosses over here. And so this trigger, if you just touch that with the slightest touch, and the pollen here is shot down onto your finger, faster than the human. All Catasetums have those pollen ejecting triggers. Here you can see it really clear.
On the male flowers.
Yeah, on the male flowers. The female flowers don't have pollen because they're female. They have stigmatic cavities where the pollinia goes. Yeah. The bristle is the trigger. That's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really amazing to touch these. You know, there was a, you know, you ever see those magic tricks with those guys who handle cards? And so the guy's got the card over here, and then all of a sudden the card's in this hand, and you go, how the hell did that card appear in this hand? You know, it's not complicated. He flicked the card from this hand to this hand faster than 16 frames a second, faster than your eye can see. All he did was like this, boop, boop, and he caught it. That's the trick. There's nothing to it. You just have to have really good hands. And so when the pollinia shoots out, it flies faster than 16 feet per second. And so it just clears that gap and sticks onto you. And there's a lot of force. Some researchers were studying how far the pollinia would travel from the flower. 9 feet in some cases, right? 9 feet? I mean, that's a lot. And the size of the pollinia is about the size of a euglossine bee. So there's a lot of weight to it when it hits the bee. So, cool. Yeah, see, here's another hair here. Yeah. Here they are on tenebrosum. Here they are in Spitzii. There's 2 side by side. The female flowers. Here are the 2 triggers, one here and one there. And so the trigger is positioned at the ideal place to trip with the euglossine bee, to release it. And so it's pretty amazing how they each evolve. Here are the 2 triggers here. And here's one, you know, so, yeah.
One last question.
Sure. Oh yeah. Any more?
I had a question about the in situ system. Is that a palm plantation or was that?
It was actually a cow pasture.
Okay.
Yeah, and there happened to be some coconut palms out there. Yeah, yeah. they're probably volunteers. You know, people throw coconuts around, they sprout and grow, and Catasetums grow on them. And some areas you go, and the fence post, the core of the fence post will rot. And so you'll get to some area, and then every single fence post will have Catasetum sprouting right out of the middle of it. Yeah, it's amazing to see these things growing in the wild. Yeah, I was in Trinidad last year, and so Trinidad's pretty tropical. It's right next to Venezuela, and on the university grounds in Trinidad, there's these huge trees, and they're covered with Catasetum called macrocarpum. Huge plant, just, you're like, oh my God, how long has that plant been on that tree? And there's hundreds of them. And it's really amazing to see them, because when you look at the spent inflorescences, you can tell the females from the males. The males are shorter, or the females are shorter, and they just have a couple, you know, stems where the flowers, and the males are really long, and you could see. And so all the plants growing in the deep shade on these huge trees, they're all male. And then out on the one side of the tree where the limb broke off, in the full sun growing in the stump, is this giant female plant, and it's just loaded with seed pods. So there's just this one female and all these males on the back of the tree. Just amazing to see that, and it just confirms, right, what I've seen myself in other areas, that a plant with lots of resources is going to be female. And many times it's not that common to have enough resources to be female, because if you are under the canopy of the tree, you're most likely going to be male. Yeah.